Isabella Moore grew up amid luxuries and privileges, an heiress to the powerful Walter and Margaret Moore, an influential couple from the city of Oak Ridge. Raised in imposing mansions and surrounded by the best, Isabella was raised to attend high society, but always felt disconnected from that world. Her heart longed for something more authentic and genuine, a desire that led her to meet Liam Jones, a humble boy from Greenwood, a village far from the riches and eccentricities of Oak Ridge. Liam was a mechanic, owner of a simple workshop inherited from his grandfather. He met Isabella by chance, when she passed through Greenwood on a lonely walk and her car broke down on the road. Liam's authenticity and kindness won her over, while he was enchanted by Isabella's generous spirit and easy smile. A year later, Liam proposed, and Isabella accepted without hesitation. However, she knew that the news would not be well received by her parents, who expected her to marry someone from their own social circle. When Isabella told her parents about her engagement to Liam, she faced immediate resistance. For Walter, marriage was a strategic alliance, and he believed that Liam could never offer his daughter the kind of life he considered appropriate for someone of the Moore lineage. Margaret, although more flexible, also hesitated, fearing the social difference between the two. Even so, Isabella was determined to fight for the love she felt and proposed something unusual to her parents: that they go to Greenwood to meet Liam and his family disguised as ordinary people, without the weight of wealth and status. The idea initially caused indignation in Walter, who found it absurd to pretend to be someone he wasn't. After all, he was a respected, well-known, and powerful businessman. Margaret, in turn, saw Isabella's request with softer eyes. She knew that, deep down, her daughter wouldn't make such a request if she didn't deeply love Liam. After days of discussion and much insistence, Walter reluctantly agreed, giving in more to Margaret's insistence than to his own will. On the morning of the trip, Isabella helped them dress simply. Worn and discreet clothes, far from the luxurious pieces they were used to, began to make up Walter and Margaret's new image. He looked in the mirror, uncomfortable with his humble look, while Margaret fixed her hair and tried to get used to her modest appearance. Isabella, in turn, watched everything with a mix of hope and nervousness, hoping that this meeting would change her parents' view of her fiancé. Inside the car, the silence was absolute. Walter drove with a closed expression, still uncomfortable with the idea of pretending to be someone he wasn't. Margaret, sitting next to her, kept her gaze lost on the road, sometimes trying to calm down, sometimes wondering if that experience would really change anything. Despite the tension, they were both committed to giving Liam a chance, even if the initial discomfort was still with them. As the path from Oak Ridge to Greenwood unfolded, the landscapes also changed. The road of mansions and luxurious buildings gave way to modest houses, green fields, and local shops. Margaret, who rarely visited villages, observed the people in the streets, the small businesses, and the simplicity that contrasted immensely with her everyday life. The trip, which initially seemed short, began to become a journey into a world they barely knew. Finally, they saw the entrance to the village of Greenwood, where the simplicity of the place caught their attention. There was a tree-lined central square, surrounded by small houses and an old church. Walter and Margaret took a deep breath, knowing that the experience there would not be easy, but that they were doing this for Isabella. The first stage of the challenge had been completed. Now, all that was left was to face the reality of the simple life that intrigued her daughter so much. Upon arriving at Greenwood, Walter and Margaret were greeted by a peaceful and charming setting. The village was small, with cobblestone streets and modest houses. The central square, with its ancient trees and a small bandstand, seemed to be the heart of the place, where some children played and neighbors chatted. To them, who were accustomed to Oak Ridge's wide, busy boulevards, the stillness and simplicity of Greenwood were almost unreal. The feeling of displacement intensified, but they both knew they needed to keep an open mind to fulfill the purpose of their visit. The house of the Joneses, Liam's family, was close to the workshop where he worked. Upon seeing the modest house, Walter and Margaret looked at each other, feeling a mixture of surprise and discomfort. The weathered wooden house and well-tended flower garden gave off a warm, homely feel. Margaret, who has always valued aesthetics, felt a small admiration for the care of the garden, something she herself appreciated. Walter, however, was still suspicious, still trapped by prejudices about what was appropriate for someone like Isabella. Sarah, Liam's mother, opened the door and welcomed them with a warm smile, inviting them inside. Dressed in a simple apron and with flower marks on her hands, Sarah exuded friendliness and authenticity. He greeted them with a kindness that left Walter and Margaret disconcerted. They were accustomed to rigid formality in social encounters, but here the simplicity of human contact struck them in an unexpected way. For a brief moment, Margaret felt that the barrier between them and the Jones family might be less rigid than she imagined. Inside the house, the simple and cozy decor told stories of a united family. Photos of Liam with his grandparents adorned the walls, alongside rustic objects and dark wood furniture. Margaret noticed a photo of Liam as a child, smiling next to his grandfather, and was overcome with a pang of nostalgia. There was something familiar and sweet about that house. Walter, still uncomfortable, observed everything with a critical eye, but began to realize that what he saw there was not poverty, but a life rich in affection. Sarah invited them to sit at the table, where she served tea and freshly baked homemade cookies. During the conversation, she shared stories from Liam's childhood, his love of cars and his desire to help others. Walter, initially silent and tense, began to become interested in the stories, observing the sparkle in Sarah's eyes when she spoke about her son. Little by little, he began to see a side of Liam that he previously ignored, a young man with solid values, respected in the community and loved by everyone. As time passed, Margaret also became involved in the conversation. She listened attentively as Liam repaired the village children's bikes and helped neighbors with repairs without charging them anything. These gestures of generosity impressed her, and she found herself smiling at the stories. It was a natural, unpretentious kindness that began to make Margaret question the rigid ideas she had about Isabella's future. Liam's simple humanity was touching a part of his soul that had long been forgotten. After tea, Sarah suggested a walk around the village so they could get to know better the place where Liam grew up. Walter hesitated, but Margaret readily accepted, eager to discover that universe that so enchanted her daughter. As they walked through the quiet streets of Greenwood, they began to see the village with new eyes. Walter and Margaret watched people interact in a warm and friendly manner, noting that the lack of luxury was compensated by deep bonds of community and friendship. At the end of the day, they already felt that that visit had taught them more than they imagined. Every conversation and every observation made their challenged his beliefs about what was really important in life. When they returned to the Joneses' house, the weight of the judgment they carried seemed to be slowly dissipating. After walking through the village, Walter and Margaret returned to the Joneses' house, where Sarah was already waiting for them with a simple dinner, but prepared with obvious care. At the table, the two sat next to Sarah and Thomas, Liam's father, who had arrived from work shortly before. Thomas was a man with a weathered face, calloused hands, and a sincere smile. He extended his hand to shake Walter, who hesitated for a moment, but returned the gesture with a firm shake. The environment, although modest, exuded welcome and hospitality. For Walter, accustomed to formal dinners and cold meetings, the experience was a shock. He felt that, in that house, the value of every gesture and word was true, but he was still torn between admiring this simplicity and thinking it wasn't enough for his daughter. As dinner progressed, Thomas began telling stories about village life, the value of community, and how everyone always supported each other. He described how when someone faced difficulties, neighbors would come together to help, whether it was repairing a damaged roof or helping a struggling family financially. Walter, although interested, maintained a reserved posture, while Margaret let herself be drawn into the stories and demonstrated curiosity about the Joneses' way of life. She was surprised to realize that she felt a sense of belonging there, something she hadn't experienced in a long time. During the conversation, the topic of Liam and Isabella's wedding came up naturally. Thomas, a man of few words, firmly declared that Liam was his greatest pride, and that the young man had always been faithful to the values he had learned from his family. He stated that he knew that Isabella loved Liam, and that he believed that true love overcomes any barrier. Walter couldn't help but feel uncomfortable and asked, in an almost challenging tone, how Thomas expected Isabella, a young woman from a wealthy background, to adapt to a life so different from what she was used to. Thomas was unfazed and calmly replied that he believed in Isabella's ability to adapt, especially since she had a heart that didn't seem to care about luxury. Thomas's calm response made a deep impression on Margaret, who watched the conversation with attentive eyes. She knew that, in Oakridge, Thomas's answer would be seen as naive, but here, in the village, it seemed almost an unquestionable truth. Margaret felt a rush of sympathy for Thomas's conviction and the sincere way in which he approached the matter. She was beginning to understand that, for the Joneses, values such as honesty, respect, and unity were non-negotiable foundations. These principles touched her in a way that made her question the coldness with which she had approached life until then. Walter, however, could not get rid of the worries that afflicted him. He argued that even though love was important, financial stability was necessary to build a life. Sarah, who until then had been listening in silence, intervened gently but firmly. She explained that although they had little in material terms, there was never a lack of love and support in the family. For her, the emotional stability and integrity of a home were built by sincere bonds, and not just by money. Walter, perplexed, could not understand how anyone could believe so blindly in a value he considered secondary. The conversation became more intense, but without losing respect. Margaret, as she watched the interaction, felt something shift within her. She had always believed that success was measured by possessions. But there, sitting in the Joneses' house, she began to realize that this view was, perhaps, limited. She glanced at Walter, trying to read in his eyes whether he was being touched by those words. Walter, however, remained unyielding, although he couldn't deny that Thomas and Sarah's words made him think. He wondered if the love that united the Joneses would really be enough to sustain a dignified life for Isabella. At the end of dinner, Sarah served a homemade cake that she had prepared herself, while the conversation took on a lighter tone. Walter and Margaret, although still resistant, felt that the family's hospitality was somehow softening the fears they carried. Liam, who until then had been quiet, watched the interaction with a mix of apprehension and hope. He knew the meeting between the families would be challenging, but he also believed it was an important first step in earning the Moore's respect. As Margaret praised the cake and thanked her for the meal, something inside her was already beginning to change. She remembered the nights she cooked with her mother, before she got married and entered the routine of high society. Those simple moments were full of affection and, for a moment, Margaret felt that she had rediscovered a part of herself that had been dormant. At the end of the night, they said goodbye with a sincere thank you. The Joneses walked them to the door, and before leaving, Margaret promised Sarah that they would return for another visit. Back at the simple hotel where they had decided to stay to maintain their cover, Walter and Margaret were silent as they settled into their room, each one lost in their own thoughts, absorbing the impact of the impressions they had received throughout the day. Walter, still struggling with his doubts, wondered if the love between Liam and Isabella would truly be able to overcome their financial and lifestyle differences. He saw Isabella's enthusiasm as naive idealism and feared that she was not prepared for the difficulties of a simple life. Margaret, in turn, was overcome with a series of conflicting emotions. The Joneses' hospitality and the sincerity with which they spoke about love and family moved her deeply. Although he had always valued status and comfort, something about his interactions with Sarah and Thomas awakened memories of a time when life seemed simpler and full of meaning. Margaret couldn't explain it, but she felt that somehow the encounter with Liam's family was challenging her deepest beliefs, and that it scared and delighted her at the same time. While Margaret reflected on everything she had witnessed, Walter tried to convince himself that none of it mattered. In his view, financial stability was the basis of a successful and happy life. He could not accept that Isabella, his only daughter, was willing to give up so much for a relationship based, according to him, on an idealized vision of love. He decided that he would need to talk to Isabella again and try to make her see what he saw as the harsh reality of the world. After a few minutes of silence, Walter finally addressed Margaret, sharing his concerns. He expressed his fear that Isabella was making a serious mistake by entering into a marriage that he judged to be incompatible with her upbringing and expectations. Margaret listened attentively, but unlike before, this time she did not immediately agree with her husband. She explained that she was beginning to see something valuable in Isabella's relationship with Liam, a sincerity that, in her opinion, was difficult to find in their social circle. The conversation between the two became intense, with Margaret arguing that perhaps Isabella and Liam's love was more genuine than Walter was willing to admit. Walter, surprised by his wife's position, argued that love did not pay bills or guarantee stability, to which Margaret responded that perhaps emotional stability and happiness were priorities he was neglecting. She felt that there was something real in the happiness that Isabella found with Liam and that this could, indeed, be worth more than status. For the first time in years, Margaret felt brave enough to challenge Walter's opinions. She began to realize that, for a long time, she had accepted her husband's impositions on Isabella's life, and that perhaps it was time to allow her daughter to follow her own path. Walter, however, remained adamant, considering that they, as parents, had a duty to protect Isabella from choices he saw as foolish. The night progressed as the couple discussed their feelings and confronted their beliefs about what truly constituted a successful life. Margaret, tired of her husband's resistance, went to sleep with the certainty that her worldview was changing and that this was undeniable. Walter, on the other hand, remained awake, reflecting on everything he had heard. He still clung to his convictions, but the seed of doubt was beginning to plant itself in his heart. That night would be a turning point for both of them. Margaret felt that there was something important in everything they experienced that day, while Walter, still reluctant, began to consider the possibility that perhaps he was wrong. The next morning, Walter and Margaret woke up still immersed in the thoughts that had accompanied them during the night. Walter felt agitated, torn between the desire to protect his daughter and the doubts that began to arise in his mind. Margaret, in turn, woke up with a new feeling, as if a flame of curiosity and understanding had been lit within her. While they were having breakfast at the small hotel, Isabella called to see how they were doing. Hearing his daughter's voice, Walter felt a mixture of love and concern. He was hesitant to accept that Isabella was willing to make such a drastic change, but he knew that, at the end of that day, his decision could be made. After the call, they decided to return to Liam's workshop to see a little more about the boy's routine and get to know the environment where he spent most of his days. When they arrived, they found Liam covered in grease, concentrating on a car engine. He greeted them with a friendly smile, without the slightest hesitation in sharing details of the hard work he was doing. Walter, used to seeing businesspeople delegating tasks, felt disconcerted when he saw Liam sweating and exerting himself physically and practically. Margaret, on the other hand, admired the sparkle in the boy's eyes as he explained the mechanics and passion for the craft he had inherited from his grandfather. While Liam was working, one of his customers, Mr. Jacobson, an elderly man who lived in the village, arrived with an old car in need of repairs. Liam immediately stopped what he was doing and went to help him, greeting him respectfully and talking about Mr. Jacobson's family, demonstrating an affectionate familiarity that impressed Walter and Margaret. They realized that Liam's relationships with clients went far beyond just business. He cared about each person who entered there, treating them as friends and life companions. For Walter, this was an almost alien approach, as he was used to purely professional and distant relationships. As she watched the way Liam interacted with the people around him, Margaret felt a growing admiration for the boy. She realized that she had spent many years of her life valuing an idea of success that now seemed empty. However, Walter still resisted, insisting that Liam's hard work was admirable but insufficient to offer Isabella a promising future. He whispered his concerns to Margaret, who, for the first time, responded firmly that perhaps they needed to rethink what they saw as their promising future. In the midst of this exchange, Liam, without listening to what they were saying, continued working and telling more about the village, about the difficulties and small victories of everyday life. He explained that the village might not offer the comfort of a big city, but there, everyone shared the challenges and supported each other. Walter, trying to understand, asked how he could guarantee financial security for Isabella in such a simple place. Liam stopped for a moment and replied that, for him, security was having loyal and honest people by his side, and that he would always seek to grow to offer the best possible to Isabella. Liam's words echoed inside Margaret. There was a sincerity and idealism that contrasted with everything he had learned alongside Walter. She was beginning to understand that Isabella's desire for a life with Liam was perhaps more well-founded than she imagined. Walter, however, remained skeptical, reflecting on the emotional and financial cost this decision could take. He admired Liam's determination, but felt he still couldn't fully trust the future the young man could offer. At the end of the day, after accompanying Liam to the workshop, Walter and Margaret said goodbye. Margaret congratulated him on his work, saying he was one of the most dedicated people she had met, and Liam, surprised, thanked him sincerely. For Margaret, this was a new experience of connecting with someone whose life was radically different from hers. For Walter, however, it was a confrontation with his own limitations and the idea that he might be clinging to concepts of security that did not represent his daughter's happiness. On the way back to the hotel, Walter and Margaret argued again. This time, the conversation was more intense. Margaret questioned her husband's insistence on disqualifying Liam and stated that she was willing to support Isabella, even if he decided to go against the union. Walter angrily said he couldn't accept his daughter's decision without her considering the real challenges of a simpler life. Margaret, however, felt that Isabella and Liam's love was true and, perhaps, stronger than any fears he might have had. The next morning, Walter decided it was time to confront Isabella directly. He asked her to meet for a private conversation, believing they needed to clarify what she really expected from her future with Liam. Isabella accepted her father's request and arranged to meet at a small cafe in Greenwood, where she used to spend time whenever she visited the village. Sitting at the table, waiting for her father to arrive, Isabella felt a mixture of anxiety and determination. She knew that conversation would define the course of her relationship with Liam and, perhaps, her relationship with her parents. When Walter arrived, he sat down at the table facing his daughter, watching her closely. Isabella was serious, but serene, and he noticed that the sparkle in her eyes was the same as when she was a child and yearned to accomplish something she believed was important. Walter began the conversation by questioning how she could be so sure that the future with Liam would be happy, considering the difference in realities between them. Isabella calmly explained that happiness for her was not based on wealth, but on trust, love, and the certainty that she was with someone who truly valued her. Walter tried to argue that love, no matter how powerful it was, could not solve all the problems that would arise over the years. He listed the financial challenges and possible difficulties that Isabella would face alongside someone with few resources. However, Isabella gently interrupted him, stating that she was fully aware of the challenges. He said that he was not idealizing a life without difficulties, but that he believed that with Liam he could face each one with courage. For her, love and companionship were the foundations of a solid union, and she was willing to give up material comforts to live this truth. As he listened to his daughter's words, Walter felt disarmed. It was difficult for him to understand Isabella's point of view, as he always saw material success as the only safe path. But when he heard the passion and conviction in his voice, he began to wonder if he was trapped in a limited vision of what a happy life really meant. Isabella, in turn, took the opportunity to describe the peace she felt with Liam, highlighting that he made her feel complete and capable of facing any difficulty. Noticing her father's discomfort, Isabella shared an episode she had never told before. She revealed that, on one of her trips to the village, she saw Liam helping an unknown lady who had her car broken down on the road. At that moment, she realized that his character and kindness were genuine. Walter, hearing this story, felt a pang of pride in his daughter's choice, although he still had misgivings. For the first time, he saw qualities in Liam that he had never observed in the elite men Isabella used to date. Walter then asked if Isabella believed she could be happy without the lifestyle she was always used to. She smiled and replied that she was not giving up her happiness, but rather choosing a new way of living it. Isabella explained that she always loved the simplicity and tranquility she found in Greenwood, and that, alongside Liam, she felt she could build something authentic and lasting. Her response deeply touched Walter, who remained silent, pondering her words. At the end of the conversation, Isabella reached out to her father and asked him to trust her. Walter looked into his daughter's eyes and, for a moment, saw himself reflected in that determined look. He realized that just as he had fought for his own dreams in the past, Isabella was willing to fight for the love and life she believed was right for her. Feeling the weight of his resistance lessen, Walter squeezed his daughter's hand and, with a sigh, said he would do his best to support her, even if he didn't fully understand her choice. Isabella thanked him emotionally, knowing that that gesture meant much more than the words said. Walter, seeing the happiness on his daughter's face, began to understand that although he and Margaret had their doubts, Isabella's true happiness was something they could not define or control. Upon leaving the cafe, Walter felt that the visit to the village had brought him an unexpected lesson: the value of letting children live their own lives. The next day, Margaret suggested to Walter that they visit some other areas of Greenwood to better understand the village where Liam lived. Reluctantly, he eventually agreed, as he felt that his encounter with Isabella the night before had shaken him and he needed time to process his conflicting feelings. Margaret, on the other hand, was increasingly eager to see for herself the simple, close-knit life that enchanted her daughter. They decided to go to the local church, which, according to Sarah, was an important place for the community and where many of the village's events and festivities took place. When they arrived, they were greeted by Father Samuel, a man with a soft voice and a welcoming presence. He soon recognized Walter and Margaret as Isabella's parents, as he had already heard about the charming young woman who had won Liam's heart. Samuel was curious about their visit and, upon hearing that they were visiting the village, invited them to take a short walk in the surrounding area. As they walked, he talked about the importance of unity and mutual support among the residents of Greenwood, something that went beyond mere social interaction. It was a true family. As they walked through the village, Walter began to notice small details that had previously gone unnoticed. People, upon seeing the priest, greeted him warmly, and he returned each greeting with genuine affection. Margaret, observing these interactions, felt a calmness that she had not experienced in a long time. In Oak Ridge, life was a constant race for status and recognition. Already there, in Greenwood, I realized that the value of each individual was not in what they possessed, but in the way they connected with others. While passing by a small local school, they saw children playing in the courtyard under the watchful eye of a teacher. Margaret felt an unexpected nostalgia as she watched the children, remembering Isabella's childhood, which had been equally simple before her family prospered. One of the children waved to her, and Margaret, smiling, returned the gesture. Walter noticed his wife's expression, who seemed moved by the scene. For the first time, he realized that Margaret, like Isabella, was finding something that had long been lost in their lives. Father Samuel, seeing Margaret's interest, invited them to participate in a community meeting that was taking place that evening. He explained that it was an opportunity for residents to discuss projects and support those who were experiencing difficulties. Margaret accepted the invitation with enthusiasm, while Walter, still hesitant, agreed to accompany his wife. Throughout the day, they both felt that they were integrating, albeit discreetly, into village life, absorbing the simplicity and human warmth that fascinated Isabella so much. At the community meeting that night, Walter and Margaret were able to see how people helped each other without expecting anything in return. Everyone offered what they could: time, skills, food, to support those in need. A man, who had recently lost his job, told his story, and soon other residents offered help, from transportation to temporary financial support. Walter, who had always dealt with work issues in a distant and impersonal way, was impressed to see genuine solidarity among those who had little but did a lot for others. As the meeting continued, Walter and Margaret also heard stories of young people who had chosen to remain in the village, despite offers to move to larger cities. For them, life in Greenwood had a value that no high salary could buy. Margaret, moved, looked at Walter and whispered that she was beginning to understand why Isabella felt so happy next to Liam. Walter, speechless, just nodded, realizing he was facing a reality he had never seriously considered. At the end of the night, When they returned to the hotel, Walter and Margaret were silent. There were no arguments, just a silent realization that perhaps everything they had ever believed about happiness and success was incomplete. Margaret held Walter's hand, in a gesture that hadn't happened in a long time, and whispered that she was willing to support Isabella in whatever decision she made. Walter sighed, still having some doubts, but he was beginning to accept that his daughter might have been right in choosing love over status. The next day, after their intense experiences in Greenwood, Walter and Margaret were surprised by Liam's visit. He met them at the hotel, saying he would like to have a heart-to-heart with them before they returned to Oakridge. The young man was visibly nervous, but determined to clarify his intentions and, above all, demonstrate his respect and love for Isabella. Walter, surprised by Liam's courage, invited him to sit down, and Margaret, who was beginning to see the boy with new eyes, smiled kindly, encouraging him to speak. Liam began by expressing his gratitude for Walter and Margaret coming to see his family and village. He explained that he knew that the relationship between him and Isabella was unusual, given the contrast between their realities, but stated that he was willing to face any challenges to prove that his love for her was sincere. Walter, although still skeptical, listened intently, trying to gauge the honesty in Liam's words. For him, this was a decisive moment, because more than ever, he needed to feel that Isabella would be safe and happy with the young man. As Liam spoke, he explained that his intention was not to take Isabella away from her family or the comfortable life she was used to, but that they both believed they could build something of their own. He said that he was trying hard to expand the workshop and that, over time, he hoped to be able to offer a more stable life. Furthermore, he said that he and Isabella had discussed the difficulties they might face, and were willing to walk together out of love and mutual respect. Margaret, touched by Liam's sincerity and humility, felt increasingly inclined to support them. Walter then asked Liam directly if he felt prepared for the responsibilities of a marriage, especially one with so many differences between families. Liam calmly responded that he didn't know what the future held, but he was committed to learning and striving to be the best partner he could be for Isabella. He confessed that he had his fears and insecurities, but assured that he would never do anything to hurt or disappoint her. This vulnerability impressed Walter, who began to see Liam as more than just a young man in love, but someone truly dedicated to building something solid with his daughter. During the conversation, Margaret was moved to hear Liam speak of Isabella with so much affection and respect. It was clear that he valued every detail about her, and Margaret could see that Liam's love was authentic. For a mother, seeing her daughter loved and respected like that was what mattered most, and Margaret decided right then and there that she would support the couple, regardless of what Walter decided. She felt that, with Liam, Isabella could experience true happiness, something that money could never provide. Walter, still processing everything, asked Liam what he thought about Isabella's future in relation to the lifestyle they had offered her. Liam replied that he would never ask Isabella to give up her family or her roots, but that, together, they would build something simple and based on love. He said the most important thing for them was to create a life where they both feel fulfilled, no matter where they are. Walter, touched by the wisdom in Liam's words, began to realize that the boy was more mature and responsible than he imagined. At the end of the conversation, Liam stood up and respectfully said that he didn't expect an immediate response from them, but that he just wanted them to know how much Isabella meant to him. Margaret, with tears in her eyes, thanked Liam for his sincerity, while Walter remained silent, clearly moved. Liam then said goodbye, saying he would always be willing to talk more if they wanted. After Liam left, Walter and Margaret remained seated, absorbing the impact of that conversation. Walter felt touched by Liam's honesty and realized that, over the past few days, his values and certainties had been deeply challenged. Margaret held her husband's hand and said she was determined to support Isabella and Liam. Although he still had some doubts, Walter felt that the time had come to accept his daughter's choice and trust her judgment. In the days that followed, Walter and Margaret returned to Oakridge with much to reflect on their experience in Greenwood. The trip transformed something profound in each of them. The reunion with Isabella was emotional. The parents realized that the happiness that radiated from their daughter's face was sincere and deep. Isabella, in turn, was relieved to see a silent and genuine acceptance in Margaret's eyes. Walter, still a little reticent, knew that the time had come to put his daughter's happiness above his prejudices. He took a deep breath and declared his support, not without reservations, but with the recognition that Isabella's love for Liam was greater than any fears he might have had. Walter invited Isabella for a frank conversation, where she confessed the difficulties she faced in understanding and accepting the relationship. He admitted that he feared for her, as he knew how differences between families could create obstacles. However, after meeting the village, the Joneses, and especially after hearing Liam's words, Walter felt that he was learning to see love from a new perspective. Isabella, moved, thanked her father for her sincerity and said that she respected his concerns, but that Liam was her choice, her happiness, and that she was willing to face any difficulty alongside him. With family support finally consolidated, preparations for the wedding began. Margaret took the lead in organizing it, determined to make the ceremony meaningful for both families. She wanted the celebration to symbolize the union between Liam and Isabella's distinct worlds, something simple and welcoming, but also special enough to honor the Moor tradition. To everyone's surprise, Walter, although still a little resistant, was also involved in the details, showing a genuine interest in making the day special for his daughter. The idea of marriage brought a feeling of unity to everyone involved. Margaret, alongside Sarah, planned every detail with an enthusiasm she hadn't shown in a long time. Sarah, enchanted by Margaret's affection, felt grateful to see her family being respected and valued. The two became close, exchanging stories about their children's childhoods and realizing that, despite their differences in background, they shared the same desires for their children's future. The friendship between the mothers brought a new layer of meaning to the upcoming wedding. Meanwhile, Walter, who had initially remained on the sidelines of the discussions, began to become more actively involved, helping to finance the preparations and ensuring that nothing was missing. He wanted the wedding to be a memorable event, even if simple, and to represent the true union of two families. His initial resistance gave way to a feeling of pride and admiration for Isabella and Liam, who, despite the difficulties, remained firm in their love. Increasingly, Walter realized that although the Joneses were different in lifestyle, they shared values that he came to deeply respect. The ceremony was planned to take place in Greenwood, in the garden of a local farm decorated with flowers from the village itself. The choice of location was an agreement between both families, symbolizing the respect and integration of the worlds that would come together. Isabella, upon learning of the preparations, felt deeply touched by her parents' commitment. She knew how difficult this change had been for Walter and Margaret, and she felt more connected to them than ever. For Isabella, this marriage was more than a union with Liam. It was the chance to prove that true love could overcome any barrier. As the big day approached, the tension between Walter and Liam eased, giving way to a relationship of respect and admiration. Walter realized that Liam was willing to do anything to care for and protect Isabella. Seeing Liam's commitment to marriage and the simple life they chose, Walter realized that true happiness was not in what he wanted for his daughter, but in what Isabella and Liam would build together. With this understanding, Walter finally embraced the future his daughter had chosen. The night before the wedding, Walter approached Liam and honestly apologized for his previous behavior. He admitted that it was difficult to accept Isabella's choice, but that he was now ready to be part of this new chapter in their lives. Liam, touched by the gesture, shook Walter's hand, promising that he would do anything to ensure Isabella's happiness. That moment sealed peace between them and, for Liam, it was a confirmation that his choice and his love for Isabella were now also accepted and respected by her family. The wedding day arrived with clear skies and a light breeze moving through the village of Greenwood. The garden chosen for the ceremony was decorated in a simple and charming way, with wildflowers and lights hanging between the trees. Walter and Margaret arrived early, nervous, but happy to see the efforts of both families turning that dream into reality. For them, every detail symbolized a bridge between the very different worlds of the Moors and the Joneses. Margaret, moved, helped Isabella get ready, sharing laughter and tears with her daughter, in a moment of love and complicity that brought them even closer together. Beside her mother, Isabella wore a simple but elegant dress that perfectly matched the village atmosphere. Her eyes sparkled with joy and expectation. For Margaret, seeing her daughter so radiant was confirmation that the path she had chosen was the right one. When she finished helping Isabella, Margaret gave her a long hug and said that, regardless of where they were, she would always be by her daughter's side. Isabella, with tears in her eyes, thanked her, knowing how much this support meant. The ceremony began with Liam and Isabella holding hands, surrounded by family, friends, and villagers who came to celebrate their love. Father Samuel, who had known both of them for a long time, performed an emotional ceremony, speaking about the strength of love and the importance of respect and commitment. Her words deeply touched the guests, especially Walter, who, upon hearing about the value of union, felt that he finally understood what Isabella was looking for so much. He knew that it was not just a union of two people, but a union of stories, values, and purposes. Throughout the ceremony, Walter and Margaret were touched by every moment, seeing Isabella and Liam's genuine happiness up close. For Walter, that simple event in a distant village was one of the most meaningful experiences of his life. As he watched his daughter exchange vows with Liam, he felt like he was letting go of his old beliefs and embracing a new perspective on what success and fulfillment meant. Margaret, emotional, held her husband's hand, feeling that that journey had not only transformed Isabella, but both of them as parents. After the ceremony, guests celebrated with a feast prepared by Greenwood residents themselves. Everyone contributed dishes and drinks, and the party unfolded with laughter, music, and traditional dances. Walter and Margaret were surprised by the welcoming way they were received, as if they had been part of that community for a long time. Margaret, who at the beginning of the journey did not imagine being there, was happy to be part of such a simple, but incredibly true celebration. She and Walter felt transformed, as if they had found a lighter, happier version of themselves. During the party, Liam gave a short speech, thanking everyone and declaring his love for Isabella in a way that moved everyone. He dedicated special words to Walter and Margaret, thanking them for their trust and support, even if doubts had arisen at the beginning. Listening to Liam, Walter felt pride and an intense emotion that he couldn't contain. He realized that this humble and sincere young man had earned his respect and, more importantly, his place as a member of the Moore family. As night fell, the lights hanging from the trees created a magical atmosphere, and the bride and groom's dance began. Isabella and Liam danced together, their eyes shining, while everyone present watched them with smiles and tears of emotion. Walter and Margaret danced together too, feeling that this moment was a milestone of renewal in their own lives. It was a fresh start for everyone there, an opportunity to redefine what really mattered. For them, the journey that began with resistance and doubt now ended in acceptance and peace. At the end of the party, Walter and Margaret said goodbye to the Joneses and the residents of Greenwood, thanking them for the welcome and generosity with which they were received. They felt like they belonged there and knew that whenever they returned, Greenwood would welcome them with open arms. When they said goodbye to Isabella and Liam, Walter held his daughter's hand and, sincerely, wished them a happy life. Isabella smiled, knowing that her love and courage had finally been understood and accepted. Walter and Margaret left Greenwood with lighter hearts and a deeper learning about love and the true value of relationships. That trip transformed their worldview and brought them closer to their daughter in a way they had never imagined. They returned to Oak Ridge as different people, carrying the understanding that love and happiness do not depend on riches, but on true connections and values that transcend the material.